And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Ryan Metzler.
Hey everybody, it's Ryan Metzler here again, and today we're going to check out a dice placement game, or a worker placement game that uses dice. That was a Kickstarter project that's been released for quite some time now by Nightworks, and that game is Dark Horse, which of course takes place in a rail building type era, where you're trying to build up your cities and towns in order to generate resources, in order to build more cities and towns and railways out on the board. You're going to place dice by rolling them and placing them on different actions that will require different numbers, and when you do so, you'll get to take the corresponding actions in order to further your position in the game. Real quick, why don't we just find out what you get inside of this box and how the game plays, and at the end we'll come back here and I'll sum it all up for you. So here you can see the components for Dark Horse. Now we're set up for a 4-player game. This is essentially a die placement game, or a worker placement game that uses dice. And so you're going to be rolling dice at the start of each round, then placing these dice, and after all of the dice are placed, you're going to be resolving the actions. What you can see out on the board here is we've got the game already set up. These tiles here are modular, so you can move them and place them however you want. These 4 here, the or, always come up or. The rest of them, you can flip upside down, you'll arrange them, and you'll put them out on the board. Some of these spaces are red surrounding them. This means that they're rugged. Building there will cost you extra resources, extra ore in this case. Now building here is also an extra ore, so building on this one would cost you 2 extra ore, 1 for the surrounding red, and 1 because the tile itself is rugged. At the start of the game, each player is going to place 1 city, anywhere they want essentially on the board, and they're going to place 2 of their towns on the tiles that surround their city. Anywhere your city is, you can see the flipped over tiles. So this tile was flipped over like this, but since it's adjacent to my city, I get to see it. So I chose for the blue player to build on a corn and on a wood, and so those are the 2 I chose there. This player is building on a corn and a wood. We have an ore and a wood, and 2 ore over here for the green player. Now, if these had come up differently, they'd of course start with different resources, but based on their starting positions and what was available, this is what they chose to build for free at the start of the game. Each player is also going to have their own ability. They'll have a role that they play. I'm not going to integrate these into gameplay because keeping track of all of the different changes that would happen from them is next to impossible while kind of going over, but you'll see that they have different abilities. So for example, this one gives you the ability to scout on an 8+. Well, scouting is usually a 9, so 8+ is a little bit easier than 9. You must use a natural 2 to take the hired hand action. So if you look for hired hand, it is a 2, but it doesn't usually require a natural 2. I have to use a natural 2. And it says even if that action has already been taken, I can still take it. So each of these cards is going to give you different abilities. For example, the tracker here says the mayor action costs you 12+. Well, it's usually only a 10+. A 10 exactly, but now it's a 12+. But I may use modifications to claim it, which I couldn't usually do. Or on 2, I can ignore all rugged penalties. So building on these rugged areas doesn't cost the tracker anything. And there are all kinds of these action cards or these role cards that will change how you play the game based on which one you have. Just know that those are available and will change the gameplay for each player. So how this is going to work is each player has their own dice. You'll start the game with 2 dice, and you can earn a 3rd. But each player is going to roll their dice at the start of each placement phase, and then you'll go over and start placing them. So real quick, why don't I roll the dice for each player, and we'll go ahead and see what they're going to do. So here we go, there's the roll. So here we have our rolls. Now before we get into placing those, at the start of the game, each player has a rail they must play. These rails, they just look like little wooden pieces, and they have to extend from your city. Now the reason you place these is that building them out will allow you to build new cities. When you have 2 rails out like this, you can build a city on any hex that's away from your own city and has at least 1 rail bordering it. So now if I did this, I could build a city out here later. But it'll also allow you to access resource hexes that you don't currently have access to from your city. Your city has access to all of the hexes surrounding it. So if I built out like this, I'd also have access to building a town on this resource out here. So we'll say that this player builds one here. This player builds one like this because they're going to try and get out to this ore here. Our green player has built one from here, and they go from there to there. And we have the purple player who's going to build out this way to try and get access to some of these maybe. So they've all built their rails. Now, each player has their set of dice. We have a 2 and a 1 for green. We have a 4 and a 1 for purple. We have a pair of 1s for blue. And we have a 1 and a 2 for red. So the first thing that's going to happen is that green, who's first, is going to get to place one of their dice. They have a 2, and so they're going to place this 2 out onto the hired hand. All right, what this is going to let them do is it's going to let them get a bonus die for next round. But that doesn't happen just yet. They've placed, and so now we move on to the next player. Instead, if they'd wanted to, they could have placed both of their dice somewhere, but they chose to place a 2 right there. Purple has a 4 that they're going to place, and this 4 is going to go ahead and go out on the work crew. Now, this requires a natural 4. That's what this shows right here, so they're going to place it there, and it requires a natural 4. They could not use a 3 and a 1 if they had it. Blue is going to place both of their dice at once. They're going to place them out on the Pioneer, which requires you place at least 1 1 and then 1 die of any value. And this will let them draw some cards in a little bit here. Finally, we're going to go to red, and red kind of got hosed a little bit here. See, they can't place on the 2 because there's already someone there. They also can't place both of their dice together because there's really nowhere a 3 is any good for them because you need a natural 3 here on politics. So, they're going to go ahead and they're going to use a 2 to produce on one of their goods. So they have corn and they have ore. They have corn and wood, so they're going to go ahead and place on one of these spaces here to produce some wood. Now that we're done with that, we're going to go back to the top of the line, and green is going to place again. So green only has a 1 left. What are they going to do with it? Well, they're going to produce. So green is going to go ahead and look. They make ore, so it makes sense for them to place on the ore production. Then we move on to purple, who has a 1 left. They don't really have many choices either, so they're going to go ahead and produce, and purple will produce, let's say they produce ore as well. Finally, red has 1 die left, and they produce both corn and wood, so they haven't produced any corn yet. They'll place right there. After everyone has placed their dice, you're going to go ahead to the resolution phase of these dice. So we would resolve, starting with the turn order track here, which always requires a 3+, and will of course put you in that position in turn order. And we would move on along this track all the way to the end. So first would be turn order, of course, that's kind of self-explanatory. Then we have the dealer here. This one actually happens immediately, but if you were to place on it, you would place 1 die and then use another die at a +1 or a -1 to place it on the track. That doesn't actually rotate the die, so it wouldn't rotate a 2 to a 3. It just allows you to place on an action that is 1 higher or 1 lower than the die you used. Instead of doing that, you can actually take one of these loan markers, and this is going to let you get resources. It lets you get any 3 resources, it says on the back of the chip. However, you must pay them back by the end of the game, pay 6 for it, or lose a victory point at the end of the game. So that's a way to get resources that you'll need to build stuff out on the board. Then we come along to the production area. Red is producing on corn and on wood, and so we look at red. They produce 1 corn and 1 wood, and they would take those resources here, and they would add them to their supply. So red gets a corn and a wood, and they start with some resources at the start of the game. Next, we're going to have green produce, and they're going to produce ore. Green produces 2 ore, so they take their 2 ore and they add it to their own resource area. Finally, we're going to have purple produce. Purple produces ore as well, but they only produce 1, so they get 1 ore and place it in their area. If you look here, there's a spot with a 4+ die that can be placed. When you place these, you're going to get an extra one of whatever resource you're producing. So you could get an extra wood, an extra ore, or an extra corn. This next space here is the Pioneer action. And the Pioneer action is going to allow you to draw cards from this deck here. You're going to draw 2 cards, and you're going to keep one of them and discard the other. So when we draw these, you'll see that we have action cards here. And these action cards can be used throughout the game at various different points. So this one says you receive as many trader tokens as cities you control. Now, trader tokens are going to be a token you can use in order to get a special effect. Trader tokens are these little barrel-shaped tokens, and what they allow you to do is they allow you to trade any 2 goods that you have for any other 2 goods that you would need later in the game. So basically, it's just going to let you swap things so that you can get the right combination of resources. However, it also has this little death icon in the corner. This means that when you take this action using this card, you automatically go to last in the turn order. So you can play this, but it has a detrimental effect. The other card here is Eavesdropping, and this lets you take first turn order. It also lets you take a wild die token, which looks like this. It either allows you to re-roll all of your dice or to add 1 or subtract 1 from a die. And you can look at as many cards as you want that your opponents control. So if they have hands of cards, you can look at them and see what they have planned for later. So maybe your player decides to take this card and discard the other one. And they place this in their own supply for whenever they decide to use it and take their dice off. Now we go on to the hired hand. This is essentially going to give green 3 total dice for the next round. They'll take their die, set it aside, and after the next round they'll lose that die, but it gives them more options for placement in the next round. Politics here is an action that requires you to pay resources. You can pay anyone a corn, some ore, or a wood, and you get 1 influence, which is movement up on this track. This is going to be the game timer, because when someone passes the 11th spot, the game will end, and each one of these influences is worth a victory point at the end of the game. So getting these is pretty good. 4 here, which is where purple is, will allow you to produce resources on 2 hex types. Well, purple is currently on ore and on wood, so they would probably choose ore and wood and produce 1 of each, taking those resources to put into their own supply. Even though none of our players are placed on the future actions or the further actions, why don't I go ahead and cover them anyway so you can hear what they do. So now we're on the rail baron, and you have to have a natural 5 to place here, and in a 4-player game, 2 players can place on this spot. Usually it's only 1, because these are actions that are limited. The gray actions are unlimited, so as many players that want can place on these actions when they want to. But you have to have a natural 5, it costs you 2 ore and a corn, and you will build 2 rails. That means you'll get 2 rails from the supply, and you'll be able to build these rails immediately. So, if blue, for example, had done this, they would build rails out like this, maybe. And it's important to build rails out because you're going to get points for each town that you access via rail. So when you access towns via rail, at the end of the game, those will be worth points. In addition, it's going to allow you to expand out to areas where you can build more stuff. For example, I can now build a city here if I wanted to, and I can now build a town because I have access to this area. So building out rails and expanding your network is going to be important for getting points and getting more resource availability. The next action here is the builder, and again, 2 players can use this in a 4-player game, but in less than that, it's going to be limited to 1. This is how you build new towns and new cities. So for 2 corn and a wood, you can build a new town on a resource, or on a resource hex. If that hex is rugged, because it either has rugged printed on it or something around it, it's going to cost you an ore as well. In addition, you could spend a gold and 4 wood in order to build another city. And building these cities out will essentially give you more access to more hexes and allow you to expand out further, and there are certain things that are going to give you benefits for having more hexes that you're access to and more cities on the board. For example, you can only keep as many wild die tokens as you have cities on the board. So it's good to have access to have more of those tokens. The next actions are 7, 8 costs. So you have to have a 7 or an 8 total to get onto them. And you have 2 choices when you roll that. You can either pay any 4 resources to take a gold, or to take any 2 resources, so a 4 to 2 trade, or you can go up 1 in turn order and either you can get an anvil and a wild die token. Now, the wild die tokens we've already covered, but the anvil tokens are going to go ahead and let you share a non-restricted action space. That's going to be any of the spaces that don't say restricted on them. Or you can use it to change your die to any number when you roll it, so this will let you change a die. So, you have your choice there. A roll of a 9 is going to let you scout, which is to look at the top 3 cards of the action card deck, take one of them and replace the other 2. Now, here we get into a scenario where there's something called an event card, which if you draw one of them, happens immediately, and could have either good or detrimental effects. So this one says building rails costs 1 additional ore. Usually building rails will cost you ore, right here, 2 and 1. It would cost you 3 and 1 while this event is in action. In addition, it says here jail, 2 plus, the player playing this card may choose to take 1 gold from the bank this turn only. So if you take it, you can go ahead and go to jail, which will put one of your dice in jail, but you can go ahead and take a gold from the bank. So it's kind of like robbing the bank in order to get a gold. When you play this, if you draw it, it automatically gets played, so you have to play them. However, in this case, you have a choice of taking the either action cards. You could take either of these 2 action cards, or you could choose to draw the event, but if you draw the event, of course, it goes off, and then bad things could happen. So maybe they decide to take one of the event cards, place the other 2 cards back on top, however they decide, and they go on. The 10th action is restricted. That means that only 1 player may take it, and it may never be shared by any means. But this is going to be the mayor action. You need a natural 10 for all restricted actions. It's going to get you an influence, any 1 resources, and this mayor's key. When you have this key, that means that anytime you take the politics action, you don't have to pay a resource in order to get the influence. And you'll keep the mayor until, of course, somebody takes it from you. The sheriff also requires a natural 10 in this case. You will get to go first in turn order, and you'll get the sheriff action. That gives you this silver die, which will replace one of your dice, and when you roll it, you can always have the option of switching it to the opposite side, so a 5 becomes a 2, or a 6 becomes a 1, or vice versa. If you do this, you can't modify the die in any other way, but it gives you that benefit. In addition, any of those cards that show the jail icon cannot affect you, so you won't get the option of taking them if they're good for you, but you also can't be affected by them if they're bad. It's a good reason to have the sheriff. 11 is the broker, which will allow you to take one of these little stock tokens here. And the stock tokens say on them, exchange for 3 resources any 1 time you want, or a gold. So you can take 3 resources or a gold whenever you want to, as needed by this token. So, if you get one of those, you can get some resources. Finally, we have 12 in the market. 12 is going to get you a gold and allow you to build a rail without having to pay a cost. The market is going to let you do any one of these 3 actions. Pay any 3 resources to take any 1, pay a gold to take any 3, or pay 6 resources to take 1 gold. Essentially, the players are going to play as I showed you, rolling their dice, placing their dice in turn order, either placing 1 or 2 dice usually in order to get an effect out on the board, and then resolving the actions from the start all the way through to the end. The idea here is, of course, to get up to, as I said, 11 points in the game, which is going to trigger the end game, which will end at the end of that round. Alternatively, it can end if one player manages to place both of their cities and all of their towns on the board, which will then go to the end of the round, and scoring will take place. At the end of that game, which I already described how it ends, you're going to get 1 point for each one of these influence that you have. So being the first to end the game, or being the one who ends the game, of course, is worth extra victory points. In addition, each one of these gold that you've collected from the Tycoon, or from, of course, trading stuff in for them, whatever the case may be, trader up here, you'll get 1 victory point for each gold. Your cities are going to score for each one of these towns that they're connected to via rail, which means that just from this basic starting position, this one would not count. It's not connected via rail, but this one would. And for each one of those, basically each city is going to be worth 1 point for each town it's connected to. So in this case, right now it's worth 1, but if we place this one out here, it's now worth 2. In addition, if we had another city that railed all the way back, it would count as well. So you're going to want to try and connect your cities to your villages or your towns as much as possible. Finally, you're going to get points for controlling the mayor or the sheriff. So if you control the mayor or the sheriff at the end of the game, it's worth 1 point. You're going to lose points for each loan you have. So if you've taken loans for resources and you didn't pay them back, that will be worth -1 point. And if you have any dice in jail at the end of the game, that's -1 point as well. The game basically plays out like that. You're going to place your dice, try and get stuff out onto the board, build up as much as possible in order to get this influence and receive things that will be worth victory points at the end, and whoever best manages to do this will be the winner. Well, there you have it. That is Dark Horse. Now, the game also has a solo variant that I didn't cover, and you can check that out on your own, but overall, as a dice placement or worker placement game, this is a solid game. It's not my favorite of the genre, but it is well put together. Basically, you're going to have to be making decisions on how you roll your dice, and these decisions are going to get harder the higher dice you roll. If you roll a 12, do you want to place a 6 and a 6 somewhere, or do you want to use that 12 for the awesome action at the high end? Which one's better for you at the point? You need to try and build out on the different hexes, expand your cities, get more towns, build out rails in order to get victory points at the end, and in order to get that influence in the game. Do you want to rush the end, or do you want to try and amass victory points during the game and let somebody else end it, but score victory points in a different way? As I said, it's a solid game. It's not my favorite in the genre. It doesn't match up to things like Alien Frontiers or even TWA for me, but it's a simpler version of this type of game, and one that was done on Kickstarter nonetheless. I think it's well put together and fun to play, and definitely would suggest checking it out. Overall, as I said, the rules are a little bit wonky. They're a little bit hard to read in the first edition of the game, but if you check out the updated rules online and you check out some of the fixes for some of the production stuff they've had, I think it gets a little bit more straightforward and a little bit easier to play. So overall, a very simple game, one that I would suggest checking out if you're into dice rolling games and dice placement games, and one that's fun to play. That's Dark Horse from Nightworks.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.